Good morning all and welcome to the FASD Hub Australia's webinar on alcohol and breastfeeding. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that we join from many different traditional lands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people from all over Australia, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. We note that teaching and learning has occurred in Aboriginal communities for many thousands of years. My name is Elizabeth Elliott and I chair the FASD Hub Australia Advisory Board. I'm a Professor of Paediatrics and Child Health at the University of Sydney and a paediatrician at the Children's Hospital at Westmead, where I head the New South Wales FASD Assessment Service. Now, the FASD Hub was funded by the Australian Government Department of Health in 2016. We aim to raise awareness of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and alcohol use in pregnancy and breastfeeding, and to be a one-stop shop for evidence-based resources. The Hub connects clinicians with researchers and policymakers, and with individuals and families who are living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We run educational webinars such as this, and we provide a repository for Australian research and policy. Our most popular pages are the Guide to the Diagnosis of Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, the Service Directory, and our FASD fact sheets. So please visit us on fasdhub.org.au and we welcome your feedback. Now, the purpose of this event today is to highlight the issue of alcohol use in breastfeeding and its potential harms on the infant. We'll discuss the physiology relating to alcohol and breastfeeding, the Australian guidelines to minimise harm from alcohol, and the National Awareness Campaign on alcohol and breastfeeding. The format will be as follows. Shortly, I will introduce the panellists. Then, Elise will facilitate a discussion. Finally, we'll address questions from the audience. So please type any questions or comments that you have into the Q&A box during the webinar and we'll collate those. Just to let you all know, this webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again later. Now, I welcome our experts. Our facilitator today is Elisa Strumper. Elisa is one of the community representatives on the FASD Hub Advisory Group, and she's the mum of 2 boys who she breastfed until they were toddlers. Welcome, Elisa. Naomi Hull is the Senior Manager for Breastfeeding Information and Research at the Australian Breastfeeding Association. She's a registered nurse, an international board-certified lactation consultant, and has a Masters of Public Health. Welcome, Naomi. Dr. Marnie Brown is a general practitioner and lactation consultant with a special interest in the management of breastfeeding in mums who are experiencing mental health problems. Welcome, Marnie. Nicole Hewlett is a board member of the National Organisation for FASD, No FASD, and project manager in the First Nations Wellbeing team at the University of Queensland. Nicole was a committee member of the NHMRC working group appointed to update the NHMRC alcohol guidelines to drinking, including in pregnancy, in 2020. And to Rosalind Gelia. Dr. Rosalind Gelia is a dietitian and nutritionist with a strong interest in public health. Her research informed the first guidelines about alcohol use for lactating women and the development of an app, which she'll talk about later, which is called Feed Safe. So now, Katerina Georgi is the Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education, or FARE. This is a leading not-for-profit organisation working towards an Australia free from alcohol harms. And she's going to tell us a bit about the National Awareness Campaign. And now I'd like to hand over to you, Elisa.
Oh, thanks, Liz. We're going to get started by looking at the benefits and value of breastfeeding. So Naomi, can we start with what are the recommendations for breastfeeding?
Thanks, Alyssa, and happy World Breastfeeding Week, everyone. The World Health Organization and the National Health and Medical Research Council both recommend exclusive breastfeeding to around 6 months of age. And then the World Health Organization goes on to recommend that breastfeeding continues until 2 years and beyond. The last National Infant Feeding Survey that was done in Australia was back in 2010, 2011, and that revealed that around 96% of mothers and babies initiate breastfeeding, but by that 6-month mark, only around 15% are still exclusively breastfeeding. But we do know that there are many structural barriers that are in the way and can make these recommendations quite lofty to achieve. And those barriers are things like lack of accurate information, lack of timely support, the feeling sometimes that breastfeeding isn't welcome in public spaces, the pressure to return to work earlier, low rates of baby-friendly health initiative accredited hospitals. And in Australia at the moment, we have only about 22% of our maternity services are accredited as baby-friendly. And then, of course, there's the aggressive, exploitative marketing of formula and toddler drinks, along with bottles and teats. So there's quite a few things that get in the way. And like other determinants of health, these barriers to breastfeeding and associated health outcomes are not distributed evenly across the society. So in other words, those mothers and children that have more barriers to overall health also experience significant barriers to breastfeeding.
And so you talked about the advantages of breastfeeding for those babies. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, well, there's quite convincing scientific evidence that shows that for children not being breastfed or being breastfed for shorter periods of time, there are increased risks for various illnesses and conditions. And that's like things like gastrointestinal illnesses and infections, respiratory infections and viruses, sudden infant death syndrome, ear infections, dental malocclusions, being overweight and obesity, a lowered IQ, leukemia, and for our most vulnerable babies, the premature babies, those who aren't fed with breast milk, will have an increased risk of necrotizing enterocolitis and sepsis.
And are there any benefits of breastfeeding for mothers?
There absolutely are. We know that breastfeeding is actually the final part of the reproductive cycle, and a woman's body expects to breastfeed. When they don't breastfeed, or when breastfeeding duration is reduced, their risk of reproductive cancers and breast cancer are increased, along with increased risk of type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and other cardiovascular diseases. And in addition to those health outcomes, we know that mothers report satisfaction and empowerment from breastfeeding. So breastfeeding is valuable to mothers, in part from disturbed sleep and avoidance of expense and time involved in preparing breast milk substitutes, but also due to the physiological effects of lactation hormones that enhance sleep and mood and downregulate stress reactions as well. And we've seen the challenges of food insecurity with local formula shortages due to global events and other impacts, along with the difficulties presented by infant feeding during severe climate events. Here in Australia, this is happening more and more, and they can result in lack of power, clean water, and logistical issues, which shows the safety and security that breastfeeding offers during those kind of events. And so when we consider that many mothers do go on to breastfeed for numerous years, and we consider the value of breastfeeding for mothers, babies, families, and pretty much the entire community, really, when or if a mother chooses to consume alcohol during her time breastfeeding, ABA is here to provide them with the information that they need to make an informed decision and to plan and strategize around the safest way to do this while keeping the baby safe.
Great, thanks, Naomi. So now we'll just go into some of the basic physiology of breastfeeding and alcohol and explain how it works. This is the sort of information that the ABA would be providing to mothers. Marnie, can you explain to us how alcohol in breastfeeding is different to alcohol in pregnancy?
Thanks, Alyssa. I think it's a really important thing to start with. So if a pregnant woman drinks alcohol, the alcohol is absorbed by the mother and it goes into her bloodstream. The alcohol then crosses the placenta and the baby is exposed to the same blood level of alcohol as the mother. There's no way that we can time or avoid this transfer of alcohol to the baby's bloodstream. After a baby's born, there's a more complicated process for alcohol to reach the baby's bloodstream. The alcohol is absorbed by the mum across her gut into her bloodstream. The alcohol then moves across into the breast milk and then out again over a number of hours. And for the baby to be exposed to alcohol, the breast milk containing alcohol has to be consumed by the baby out of feed and then absorbed.
And you work with lots of breastfeeding mothers. Can you talk us through the physiology of alcohol and breast milk and how you explain it to mums?
Sure. So we talk about that as being the pharmacokinetics of alcohol. And what happens is alcohol moves into breast milk via a mechanism called passive diffusion. But this basically means is that a chemical can move from an area of high concentration to one of low concentration. It's basically a force to try and always kind of equalize. Initially, when a mum has a drink of alcohol, it's higher in her bloodstream. And so some of the milk will move across into, some of the alcohol will move across into the milk. So it'll come down in the bloodstream and come up in the milk. What the interesting part is as the mother's body, her liver primarily metabolizes the alcohol, it will come down and the milk will move out of the breast milk and back into the maternal bloodstream. So it doesn't just come across into the milk and stay there. Alcohol enters the breast milk approximately 30 to 60 minutes after a woman starts drinking, and it remains there for several hours. The time until there's no alcohol in a mother's breast milk varies a bit according to her height and weight, and whether she's eaten at the same time as drinking, because food slows the absorption. But the general rule is that for every standard drink a woman drinks, she needs to wait at least 2 hours for the alcohol to leave her milk.
Other than alcohol going into and out of the milk, does it have any other effects on lactation?
So interestingly, we do know that there seems to be an effect of alcohol on the maternal, the milk ejection reflex, or what we often call the letdown reflex. So we think this is via mum drinking the alcohol causing a reduce in oxytocin levels. So oxytocin is a hormone that causes the letdown reflex, and a delay in that letdown. So we know from the research that after approximately 1 or 2 drinks, we could see a reduction in the infant's milk intake by 20 to 23% in the 3 to 4 hours after the mum drinks, when she feeds her baby in that time. We also know that it can cause infant agitation and poor sleep patterns in the baby. We think that nursing or pumping within an hour before ingesting alcohol might slightly reduce the subsequent amounts of alcohol in the breast milk. But obviously that problem with reduced transfer to baby could be really quite problematic if large amounts of alcohol were consumed or consumed continuously.
If there is alcohol in the milk when the baby feeds, how much is the baby exposed to and what are the effects on the baby?
Okay, so I'll try and explain this. There was a study perhaps that I could use where women had just under 2 standard drinks. And if we remember that our driving limit is about, we often talk about 0.05% as a reference point, as a cutoff for safe driving. After that, the mothers had just under 2 standard drinks. After 1 hour, the mum's blood level was about 0.032. At 2 hours after that, the level in her milk was at 0.02% at 2 hours, and at even lower at 3 hours, it was about 0.005%, so quite low. So if the baby drank some of that milk at the 2 hour mark, the baby's drink would be a 0.2 0.02% alcohol drink. So when we have a drink, we might drink a 4% beer or a 12% wine. And this is thought to result in very, very low levels in the baby. So I am talking here about 1 to 2 standard drinks. So we also need to remember that older babies often feed less often and take lower volumes. So it can vary a little bit between mums and babies.
And can you speak just a little bit to the effect of alcohol on the baby once it's absorbed it?
Absolutely. So when we're thinking about this, we need to differentiate between chronic heavy alcohol use, regular alcohol use, and occasional timed alcohol use. And we also need to consider the effect, a direct effect of alcohol on the baby, but also the secondary stuff. So obviously a baby's at great risk of not being safely cared for if mum's intoxicated. And also there's issues with safe sleeping, and the risks of co-sleeping are obviously very much higher if mum's intoxicated. So there's a couple of aspects. There's certainly no doubt that regular heavy drinking can cause serious adverse effects in newborns and infants. We know that heavy maternal use can cause excessive sedation, fluid retention, and hormone imbalances in breastfed infants. Long-term studies have been quite difficult. Lots of them aren't able to adequately control for the timing of alcohol and breastfeeding and the frequency and volume of milk that's been consumed by babies at the breastfeed. So it is a really difficult area to study. The casual use of alcohol appears unlikely to cause either short or long-term problems in the nursing infant, particularly if mum waits 2 to 2.5 hours per drink before nursing, because we know that the amount of alcohol in the breast milk is basically zero at somewhere between 2 and 2.5 hours after one standard drink. But what we don't know about is the effect of daily heavy use of alcohol. It does seem to decrease the time that mums breastfeed their infants. The long-term effects on the babies are still unclear. There's some evidence that indicates that infant growth and motor function can be affected by one drink or more daily, but then there's other studies that haven't been able to confirm that. Certainly greater or riskier alcohol consumption by nursing mothers can affect children's academic performance negatively. So it's a really important issue that we need to keep looking at.
Oh, thanks so much, Marnie. Nicole, you were part of the review committee for the current NHMRC guidelines, which were recently updated in 2020. As a reminder for those who might not be from a health background, what's the purpose of the NHMRC guidelines and what they contain with regard to alcohol and pregnancy and breastfeeding?
Yeah, so the main aim of the NHMRC guidelines are to promote health, prevent harm, and encourage best practice. And when it comes to the alcohol guidelines specifically, it aims to provide evidence-based advice on the health effects of drinking alcohol. They're really designed to help individual Australians make informed choices about how much they drink, but they're also designed to underpin policy decisions and public health messages, as well as build the capacity and the confidence of health professionals on, how to best support their clients in any given area. But it's important to emphasise that they are guidelines. They're not prescriptive rules telling people how much they should drink or when they should drink. They're really there just to provide the best advice based on all, the available evidence we have at this point in time, so that all Australians can make informed decisions. And when it comes to guideline 3, which is what we're having a yarn about today, the best advice that we have is firstly, to prevent harm from alcohol to their unborn child. Women who are pregnant or planning a pregnancy should not drink alcohol. And secondly, for women who are breastfeeding, not drinking alcohol is safest for their baby.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Rosalind, your research contributed to the first breastfeeding and alcohol guideline, which was published in 2009, as well as the current 2020 guidelines. Can you tell us a bit about your involvement and the changes to the guidelines between 2009 and 2020?
Yeah, sure, Alyssa. The first guidelines, the 2009 guidelines, where there was the inclusion of the alcohol and breastfeeding guideline was when I was just finishing up my PhD. So it was very exciting. And I was on an NHMRC scholarship. So it made complete sense for my research to be included when I was being funded by the organisation that were, collecting the evidence on breastfeeding and alcohol. So it was very exciting because it was not only the first guideline nationally for breastfeeding and alcohol, but actually internationally, there'd never been a guideline that gave direction for breastfeeding women about alcohol. And there was very little evidence around what women should be doing around alcohol and drinking alcohol and breastfeeding. And as Marnie has said, there was a lot of information around alcohol entering the breast milk, albeit at small amounts, but no guidance for women around what they should be doing at that time. So when I was invited to contribute to the 2009 guidelines, I was aware very much around the research that had demonstrated alcohol going into the breast milk. And it was really important that we look at, my research supervisor and myself around what would be the best recommendations for women at that time with breastfeeding. So the 2009 guidelines looked at alcohol and the effect on lactation. And that's where my research was focused. And the difference with the 2020 guidelines is that the evidence base that has informed these guidelines is really around the effect of alcohol on the infant and not lactation as a whole. And so regardless of where the evidence has come from, the recommendation is the same, is that in that breastfeeding women, not drinking alcohol is the safest option. And to add on to that is the harm minimisation message around timing. And I guess that's what we're really exploring today as well.
Cool, thanks, Rosalind. Nicole, could you tell us a bit more about some of the emerging research into the harms of alcohol to the baby that was considered in the current guidelines?
Yeah, so the emerging evidence it's in line with what Marnie and Rosalind have already said. It's still limited, and as we've already heard, what we do know is so that alcohol crosses into the breast milk. So if a mother breastfeeds her baby while there's still alcohol in her breast milk, the baby drinks alcohol also. We also know that a baby's brain keeps developing after they're born. So this means that an infant's brain is more sensitive to damage from alcohol than an adult brain. But what that damage is remains to be discovered. So in terms of emerging research into the harms on babies, the limited evidence that we have more speaks to short-term effects on babies exposed to alcohol via breast milk, which is really around what Dr. Marnie's already said, around feeding and sleeping. So we know that alcohol in the bloodstream, as Dr. Marnie said, suppresses the action of oxytocin, which is linked to that let-down reflex. And that suppression of oxytocin results in a delay in that milk down, the milk letdown, and also the amount of breast milk available to bub. This then affects how much breast milk the baby is getting, which is often inadequate. So we see issues around feeding, which then of course affects sleeping. That sleeping issue is compounded by the evidence that suggests that if an infant's exposed to alcohol, they may fall asleep immediately, but the sleep is disturbed and restless. So they tend not to be able to self-settle between sleep cycles, and it's much harder for them to settle when they do wake.
And when it comes to the research that underpins the guidelines, we should acknowledge there are some limitations. Could you tell us more about why they made the recommendation that they did? Yeah,
so a lot of those limitations sits around what good quality evidence is available. And because the NHMRC guidelines are, they're based on like the creme de la creme of studies. But what do we do when there isn't that level of quality in the research? The little research that we do have suggests that if women want to resume drinking after pregnancy, they tend to breastfeed, they tend to give up breastfeeding to do so. Women that do continue to breastfeed tend to employ strategies to minimise the exposure of alcohol, or they don't disclose the amount of alcohol they have, or they do not participate in these sorts of studies, or there is incredible inaccuracies or bias in that self-report. So it's really, as we've already said, it's a really difficult area to have, robust evidence around. And of course, ethically, we can't make one group of breastfeeding women drink alcohol while, another group doesn't, and just see what happens. And there also hasn't been, any robust longitudinal data collected. And by that, I mean, we haven't got studies that follow up babies that have been exposed to alcohol via breast milk at like 10, 20 years to later understand, what the implications of that exposure may or may not be. So what evidence base, I guess, can NHMRC give when there really is limited evidence? Now, this is where, the demigods of their fields sat around this table at the committee and had to really reflect and respectfully debate and play devil's advocate on every point. And the result of that really insightful yarn was that because alcohol is the most widely used drug in Australia, it's been separated from that term drug. And you see this everywhere, right? Like alcohol and other drugs. And because of that, it is not held to the same account as pharmaceuticals or even, your Vicks Vaporub. So if it were, we wouldn't be having to prove its level of harm. We would have to be, we would be responsible for proving its level of safety. And the same goes for pregnancy. We know alcohol is a teratogenic. We know it causes birth defects. And yet we still have this narrative in our society of, how much can I drink before it's harmful or risky? Whereas you take a drug like, Valium, for example, we know it has the potential or the risk to cause birth defects, but we don't spend countless dollars and time investigating dose, body weight, nutrition at the time. Everyone agrees it's a hard and indisputable no. Because it's not been proven safe to use during pregnancy. So the NHMRC, working group, we decided to hold alcohol to the same account. Is there any evidence to say that alcohol passing to bub during breastfeeding is safe? No, there's definitely not. So if alcohol passes through breast milk, you are taking a risk with a brain that is incredibly sensitive to damage, and no one in the world to date knows fully what the consequences of that risk is. And that's what women should know and be informed about. But what women should also be informed about is that there are ways in which you can ensure that babies are not exposed to alcohol in their breast milk.
Well, thanks, Nicole. That leads us quite nicely to Katerina. You at FAIR, which is the Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education, have got an upcoming campaign on breastfeeding and alcohol. What are the key messages that you'll be sharing with breastfeeding mothers to provide them with information on this topic?
Thanks, Alyssa. Can I just start by saying what a stellar panel. I feel so lucky to be part of this panel of incredible women, and it's so great to hear all of the amazing work that everyone's doing and all of the knowledge here. Our role as health communicators here at FAIR is distilling this information, this amazing research, into a message that's clear for people, because what we know is that women want clear information and they want their health professionals to provide them with advice. And so we've been working on the Every Moment Matters campaign, and Every Moment Matters talks about alcohol use during pregnancy and while breastfeeding. And our role here is to understand what messages work and to try and communicate those messages to the general public and to health professionals, because we know that the vast majority of women go to their health professional to get really clear information on alcohol and pregnancy and breastfeeding. And what we've found is that lots of people are seeking out information on breastfeeding, which shows that there's lots of misinformation out there. And so we've prepared some resources, both a pamphlet and also some information on our website that provides some clear messages. And those messages are not dissimilar to what we've heard today. So the first thing is that, the guidelines say that it's safest not to drink alcohol while breastfeeding. And the second message that's really important is that for a standard drink of alcohol, it takes about 2 hours for your body to process that. And importantly, a standard drink of alcohol is a lot less than you probably think. So a glass of alcohol might have 2 standard drinks. So it's really important to understand that, you know, as someone who's 5 foot nothing, it takes my body quite a while to process a standard drink of alcohol. So it's really thinking about that so that your milk is alcohol free and so that you're doing all you can to keep yourself and baby healthy and safe.
Great. And how will this program be rolled out and evaluated?
Evaluation is absolutely key, because we often put out lots of messages, but we're not really understanding how people are receiving those messages. So we're doing an evaluation with the University of Adelaide over the course of the campaign, and we're really lucky that Every Moment Matters will run from now until mid-2024, which is excellent. So as we get data as we go, we're adjusting and we're developing further resources to help to support people. And that's how we found out, for example, that breastfeeding was an area that people wanted a lot more information. People can jump on everymomentmatters.org to find out more information about the campaign.au, or just Google Every Moment Matters and it'll come up. And in addition to those resources that I mentioned, the website and the pamphlet, there will be some e-learning tools for health professionals to talk about how you talk through these different things with women so that they have a good understanding of what they can do to help to keep themselves and their bubs healthy and safe.
Great, that sounds like some very useful resources for our audience to look into. So having talked about the recommendations and the research, now it's time for us to get into the practical details of how mums can manage this on the ground in their day-to-day lives. So to avoid harm to babies, it's important they're not exposed to alcohol. So it's safest not to drink during breastfeeding. Katerina, can you maybe give us some strategies that women can use to avoid alcohol?
I absolutely can. And I actually also just want to provide some messages for health professionals who are on the line today, because they are a key source of information, which is excellent. I think the key thing is that language matters and messaging matters. And so often what happens when we're talking about breastfeeding generally is we don't use language like choice, etc. We go, this is what happens, this is the best available evidence. But as soon as we start talking about alcohol, we start going, if you choose, if this happens, if that happens, and it's presented in a very different way. And so there's something to really think about in the way that we message this. So the assumption I think health professionals are making in the first instance is that every woman drinks. And I think that that's a flawed assumption, and it's a problematic assumption, particularly as younger people we're seeing are drinking less alcohol. So it's important to get an understanding of the person's situation and to provide messaging that really does reflect the evidence. That's also really important to provide a harm minimization message. And that's what we found through our research, that people want to also know, okay, and what does happen in terms of metabolizing alcohol as well. The other thing is a really important message around mum is that alcohol contributes to anxiety and it worsens mental health. So there's often this, I have a drink at the end of the day to wind down, and it's okay to have a drink at the end of the day. That's just complete crap, and we're selling people the wrong message there. We really need to point out that alcohol does increase anxiety and it does worsen mental health. And if you're a new mum or if you're a mum with a small bub, there's already a lot going on and it's already a really tricky time. So avoiding alcohol can help with that as well. And that's a really important message. And for women who are breastfeeding, what you can do firstly is to plan ahead. So plan ahead and have a think about the scenario that you might be in where there might be alcohol offered, and think about what you might say, what you might drink instead in terms of non-alcoholic drinks. And I should say I completely know that planning is tricky. I'm actually just looking here at, I'm trying to work out when I'm about to express milk today in between my meetings because I have a 5-month-old at home. But it's really important to think those things through, to try and have a plan. And babies can be unpredictable as well. As much as we like them to stick to our routines and our structures, sometimes they don't. So thinking about that when you're thinking about alcohol use as well.
Yeah, and mothers will all have these strategies from their pregnancy about how they avoided alcohol in their pregnancy. And so you can just continue those while you're breastfeeding as well. So apart from avoiding alcohol altogether, the important thing is avoiding alcohol in the milk going to the baby. And so this issue of timing we've talked about before, for one standard drink, it's about 2 hours, but it differs from person to person. Rosalind, could you tell us more about your work in this area, particularly developing the FeedSafe app for mothers?
You might not be able to stop me now, Alyssa. So
Keep an eye on the time.
I first developed a brochure actually when the guidelines, the 2009 guidelines were released, because I knew that women weren't going to read the guidelines, and I knew that health professionals would really want to communicate the messages in the guidelines well to breastfeeding women. So I developed a pamphlet, and that was supported by FARE and ABA, and it had really clear messages around timing. There was a chart that showed if you were this tall and weighed this much, no, if you weighed this much, it took this long to metabolize however many standard drinks. And that was really well used. And then I was approached by an app developer who was also a health promotion graduate, who said, I keep losing my pamphlet and you need to develop an app. And I said, well, actually, I don't even, this was in about 2012. And I said, I don't even have a mobile phone. So I'm not really sure how you do that. And she said, well, you don't need to worry about the app. You just need to help me develop the content. And so we went about developing the FeedSafe app, which is still available, and it's fantastic. We now have the Android version as well, which I think came about in 2014. And the app basically takes that algorithm of height and weight and looks at the metabolism of alcohol for that woman. So as Katerina said, there are other things, and Marnie also, that affect the metabolizing of alcohol, such as what you've eaten, if you're menstruating, but it is a standard of it's about 2 hours for every standard drink. And the app has been incredibly successful in that respect. It's a research translation tool. I'm a health promotion background as well as a dietitian, and I really wanted women to keep breastfeeding if they were going to drink alcohol. And my research had shown that some women actually stopped breastfeeding so they could resume alcohol intake, and I wanted to minimize the harm to the infant. The app has been incredibly popular, more so around Melbourne Cup Day and New Year's Eve. We see a spike in use, and it's free. I never wanted it as a public health measure to be charged for, because I want it to be available to everyone, and it is, and it's incredibly useful for everyone. The most important thing to remember, though, is that if you are going to drink alcohol, you need to time, as Katerina also said, and the app helps you do that. Women really want to know exactly how long it's going to take, and there's a timer in the app, so it actually pings off, or you can have it silenced, so you can just see when your alcohol is clear of breast milk. It's not infallible, and it is only a resource to support a harm minimization, but I still advocate that breastfeeding, if you don't have the app and you haven't timed, if you've been caught unawares, and as Katerina said, babies, particularly in those first 6 weeks when you're establishing breastfeeding, I wouldn't even think about drinking alcohol, because you're trying to get your feeding established, and alcohol interferes with the letdown. So any alcohol during that time is not recommended. And again, the app has all these really great recommendations and information about that. It's a library of information that is evidence-based. But if you are caught unawares, you have time, but oh dear, baby wakes up and wants a feed, and I've just drunk alcohol, it is still better to breastfeed with a small amount of alcohol in your bloodstream than to introduce formula.
Well, thanks, Rosalind. Nicole, you used the FeedSafe app when your first was born. Can you briefly tell us a little bit how that was for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I have got nothing but like Rosalind is royalty to me after that FeedSafe app. So for myself, I you know, you spend such a long time, you know, when you're pregnant and, you know, trying to get pregnant and then breastfeeding, feeling like a, you know, multi-purpose factory. And that has to be constantly conscious about every choice they make because it affects someone else, someone that you is so precious and sacred to you. And you're doing this for, you know, no less than 18 months, from trying to conceive to pregnancy to breastfeeding. I found that particularly exhausting. And this is all on top of that shifting identity and becoming a mother and all the responsibilities and emotions that couple that. So for me, psychologically, I needed goalposts, I suppose, to look forward to, like a platter of sashimi when, you know, Bub was born. And when it came to alcohol, I was really looking forward to feeling like myself a bit before, you know, the 2 years that WHO say that you've got to breastfeed till, a bit more, but feeling like an adult, having something for myself. But I also knew how incredibly important breastfeeding is for the health of Bub. So knowing and being informed that there was a way, once Bub had an established, predictable routine with breastfeeding, where I could have the best of both worlds, it was really huge for me. And that kind of independence and sense of control, I suppose, during a time when I, you know, seriously lacked both of those qualities, was important for my social and emotional well-being. And I should add that my mental health was great at the time. Like, I enjoyed breastfeeding, and I absolutely delighted in my Bub. And I was fortunate not to experience, you know, mental health issues like postnatal depression. But I still felt like that. I still recognised it was important to me at the time of my first Bub, and Feed Safe for me provided me with that sense of control and that information that we can have that for my own social and emotional well-being, as well as keep Bub safe. So, you know, big love for Roz and that Feed Safe app.
Cool, thanks so much. There's still some misconceptions and misunderstandings about breastfeeding and alcohol. For example, you might have heard about the need to pump and dump to get rid of the milk with alcohol in it, or the idea that alcohol can help with letdown. Marnie, can you tell us if there's any truth in these ideas? You're on mute again.
Clearly not very quick to learn. Thanks, Alyssa. As I said earlier, there really is no evidence that alcohol helps with the milk ejection reflex. In fact, it's actually the opposite. So that is one of those breastfeeding myths that's been around for a little while, and we probably need to keep talking about the fact that it's not the case. There's no specific need to pump and dump, just to remove milk that contains alcohol. Because we know that alcohol diffuses out of the milk over time. It's often really helpful to breastfeed your baby or pump just prior to having a drink, if you're planning to have a drink, to minimise that alcohol transfer to the baby and minimise the disruption to feeding. If you're going to only have one drink, you'll use your Feed Safe app, and likely the alcohol will be out of your milk by the time your baby next asks for a feed. If women plan to drink, some women will plan to drink more than just one drink at a time, and they then obviously can't breastfeed their baby for a bit longer. They might need to pump for comfort during that time where it's not safe to breastfeed their baby. So those women may need to take the milk off to maintain their milk production, because we know that we need to continuously remove milk to maintain a good production, but also to stop themselves from becoming uncomfortable. So they need to plan ahead for that. And they also may need to pump in the days coming up to that particular time, so that they've got some EBM express breast milk to give to their baby if their baby needs to have a feed and they've still got alcohol in their breast milk.
Oh, thank you. So when it comes to managing alcohol while breastfeeding, it's tricky in the early days, but it can become easier to plan and manage later on as the baby is bigger, not feeding as frequently. Naomi, what other tips and resources does the ABA have to support breastfeeding mothers, particularly as they continue to breastfeed with older babies?
Thanks, Alyssa. And I will echo what Nicole said. ABA is forever grateful to Roz for the creation of the app and the work that she did around breastfeeding and alcohol. The Feed Safe app is extremely popular. And incidentally, it's not just used by breastfeeding women, it's used by many people who sometimes rely on it to know if they're okay to drive, etc. So it has many uses, and we love having it as a resource. The other thing I wanted to say is that the messaging around alcohol and breastfeeding is extremely nuanced. And as we've already heard, there's so many differences around a brand new baby in the first few weeks and then an older baby. And we know that women do go on to breastfeed babies until they're 2 or 3, 4, 5. So, they might only be breastfeeding once a day. And that's where ABA comes in with our breastfeeding helpline, which is 24 hours, 7 days a week. And we also have an online live chat service via our website, breastfeeding.asn.au. And we have trained breastfeeding counsellors on the helpline, and on the live chat service, we have breastfeeding counsellors and breastfeeding educators. And they are there ready to chat to any mother who has any questions around this. We can help in the heat of the moment if they have had too many drinks unplanned, but we can also help them plan and strategize ahead of time and help them work out what's going to be the right strategy for them, given the age of their baby, frequency of feeding, whether they've started solids or not. Is there going to be another carer available to help look after their baby or young child? So I guess that's my message really, is to all the health professionals out there, is knowing that that resource is available in the community for, when it's the weekend or when they can't get an appointment. ABA is there with our app, Mum to Mum, and with our helpline, which is 1800 686 268. And the live chat service on our website. And our trained counsellors are there. And I can tell you, we do get frequent calls asking for support in making those decisions, or what do I do now? I actually stayed out longer than what I had planned. I only finished drinking 2 hours ago. What do I do now to make sure that my baby is fed and safe? So yeah, I guess that's my main message. The other thing, is thinking about the age of the baby. So as babies get older, they feed less frequently. So, and they also start solids at around 6 months. And that's when sometimes some other food or liquid can be utilized instead of breast milk if something has happened in an unplanned situation. But really, I think we have already discussed a lot of strategies today, so I won't go over all of them again, but just remind you of those resources, the Feed Safe app and ABA's helpline and live chat. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Naomi. So just to sort of summarize the strategies that we've talked about, we've looked at sort of, you can avoid alcohol use entirely, and that's the safest option. If you do want to have something, you can use timing, use resources such as the Feed Safe app to ensure that your milk is free of alcohol before you feed the baby. Again, you might need to express some milk beforehand if you think you're going to need it. So you've got an option there, or for older babies, you can sort of, fob them off with a strawberry and a sandwich until you're ready to feed. And that the other thing to think about is care for the baby, about safe sleep and things like that. And about, you still have to be a parent after you've had a few drinks. And for me personally, that's one reason why I don't drink, because it's really hard to drag yourself through bedtime when all you want to do is sit on the couch and rest because you're tired. So that's the other things that people could think about is, waking up early the next day and the kids are rampaging. I'm sure a bunch of you have seen the whale watching episode of Bluey. You don't want to be there. So there's a lot of the non-alcohol specific things as well, about looking after your baby safely and looking after yourself. So yeah, I think that's sort of all we've got planned to cover here. So Liz, I might hand over to you and then we'll have some time for questions.
Thanks very much. And thank you all for your insights. It's been a really interesting session. So perhaps if I could just summarise, we know that exclusive breastfeeding is recommended for 6 months, and breastfeeding when possible is recommended beyond that up to 2 years, and that there are clear benefits both for the mother and baby, not only physical but emotional benefits. We know that alcohol goes into the breast milk, and we've heard from you that that can affect a lot of issues. It can affect the actual breastfeeding process, letdown, etc., and supply, and it can also potentially interfere with the baby's behaviour. More worrying for heavy drinkers, it can potentially damage the rapidly developing brain and cause brain problems with brain function. And really new in research is that alcohol in breast milk potentially can also switch genes on and off, which might confer risk for later health problems. Now, Nicole mentioned we're not going to do a randomised trial where we ask half the women to drink alcohol and half not. So we're actually never going to know if there is a safe level for alcohol consumption, and if so, what that is. And that's really why, as Nicole explained, the NHMRC has taken a precautionary approach to this. And there's a clear recommendation that the safest option to prevent harm to your baby and all sorts of other harms we've heard about to the mother, to avoid alcohol where you can during pregnancy. But as we've heard again from Ros and others, Naomi, it's to be pragmatic about this. 2 years is a long time not to have a drink. And so it's very good for women to have some strategies that they can employ to minimise the harm to their baby, particularly beyond that period of exclusive breastfeeding. So what I'd like to do now is we have had some questions in the chat, and I'd like to just go to some of those questions now. Now, there's a question from Julianne Woods here asking, what target group within the community, and I think this is for you, Katerina, is the majority of information you're putting out? Who are you targeting with that information?
Sure, that's an excellent question. So with the Every Moment Matters campaign, there are 4 different streams. And so for the general awareness raising stream, we're targeting women who are aged 18 to 44. And we found that the messages, particularly around pregnancy, are more likely to resonate or connect with people, and there's more likely to result in behaviour change if the person is thinking about pregnancy and if they're thinking about drinking small amounts of alcohol during their pregnancy. So that's our predominant target in terms of the behaviour change, but you will have seen the resources and the ads on telly or around the place. So you'll see that we're also trying to get this message out to the broader community, because that supportive community is really important to the woman as well. Really important to mention that there are other streams of the campaign. So a stream that's targeting health professionals to engage them to talk about how you talk about this in a consultation environment. A stream working with NACCHO around working with Aboriginal controlled health organisations to reach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in rural and remote communities. And another stream that's working with AOD or alcohol and other drug services and other services to target women who may have an alcohol dependency and need further support. So that just acknowledges that for some people there are additional and different messages, and it's really important that we get that support out there as well.
Thanks very much, Katerina. Now there's a question for you, Rosalind, here regarding the Feed Safe app. We've heard that alcohol levels in any woman is difficult to predict because of a number of different factors: how much you drink, how quickly you drink, body composition, etc. Her question is, how does the app cope with the differences between metabolism of alcohol in different people, and does the speed at which you drink affect that? For example, I tend to sip slowly after a long time. Do I have to wait longer than usual?
Thanks So the app does have the ability for you to put in your height and weight, and that will be as accurate as we can get it without knowing if you're menstruating or what you've eaten and your fat levels. So we can't do an alcohol metabolizing study for everyone. So we just go on the algorithm that's in there. Now, with the sipping the drink question, I did see that come up, and I must have been asked that question maybe 3 years ago, because I still am the moderator for the questions for the app. And if I remember correctly, and I would probably need to follow this up for the person, I think it's Tim, it will just mean it's longer that you're metabolizing, so it's longer until you can breastfeed.
So perhaps if anyone's listening and has a question that they feel's not quite been answered, they could email us at the FASD Hub, and we'll get back to you on that answer. And remember, this webinar will be posted on the Hub, so you can watch it again. And if there are particular questions that we want to highlight, we can put some text into the end of that recording. Now, there's another question here from a child health nurse regarding mental health and mums. I'm often seeing mums who tell me they've been advised by their obstetrician that it's better to have a glass of wine with dinner to deal with their anxiety. How can we help dismiss this myth? Perhaps that should go to Marnie. Would that be your area?
I'm a general practitioner, so I suppose
or
everything
Naomi.
ends up being my area.
Who wants to answer that question? Marnie, you've gone on to mute, I'm sorry.
I think it's tricky, isn't it? I think everywhere we sometimes come across advice that's sometimes not evidence-based. And I think that as a child health nurse, sometimes that's a little bit tricky, but probably the best advice to give you is to refer your mums to these sites where they can access accurate information. So, showing them the FeedSafe app if they're breastfeeding, directing them to the guidelines. It is tricky. We all know that sometimes colleagues don't give the most evidence-based advice, and we get caught in the middle of those sort of discussions.
Yes, and we've done a bit of work with obstetricians and other health professionals, and we're often very reluctant to provide evidence-based information, particularly about alcohol, and that's because alcohol is such a pervasive part of our society, and yet women tell us they really want the information so that they can make an informed decision. Did anyone else want to respond to that question before we move on?
Liz, I might just add that this is a massive misconception, and I'd like to point my finger squarely at alcohol companies who push in their marketing that the way to wind down, the way to deal with a good day, the way to deal with a bad day is to have a drink of alcohol. And then those messages just become a bit like gospel and people don't question them. But actually a key message that we should be providing is that alcohol does exacerbate anxiety and worsen mental health, particularly over time. So even though people might have a drink and initially feel like there's relief, they'll identify then that I found it hard to sleep, that it worsened my anxiety over the next week, that it made me feel all of these different emotions. And so we should be communicating that with people, that actually you might think that there's this initial reaction, but it actually makes it worse for your mental health in the longer term. Thanks,
Katerina. Okay, there's a question here from Susan, thanking us very much for the webinar, very helpful and relevant. Now, she's worked for the last 20 years and has found that often mums who are really struggling with their alcohol and breastfeeding have a problematic drinking problem prior to pregnancy. Naomi pointed out that women are just wanting to feel normal again. Is there more information that we can provide to support mums who have problematic drinking at this time, and should we include fathers in that? So that's, of course, a really broad-reaching but important question. Who'd like to have a go at that one? Naomi, would you like to have a go, or Marnie?
I think it's probably not my area of expertise, given it's around alcohol use prior to pregnancy, but I'm sure that this all falls in part of the campaign that FAIR is working on in educating all those streams in the community. And I'm sure others will have something to add, but I think that we are working towards getting stronger as a society in being clearer about the impacts of alcohol and how to tackle those. So yeah, but I will hand over to someone else.
Well, I might just comment that Delise Hutchinson's done sort of quite a lot of work looking at the longitudinal prediction of drinking alcohol in pregnancy, and it's very clear that the earlier you start drinking as a teenager and the more you drink during those teenage years, the more likely you are to drink during pregnancy. So that's where, Marnie, that you might like to comment, the role of the GP is so important in identifying those people with problematic alcohol use before they even get pregnant. Marnie.
Absolutely, Liz. I think it is. It's ideally we get to talk to women before they are pregnant and have all of those pregnancy planning discussions. I think the other thing to be aware of is certainly in Western Australia, I can only speak from my work at King Edward, is that our tertiary hospital has a clinic for women who have alcohol and other drugs that they're using at problematic levels. So they can actually engage in antenatal and postnatal care through that clinic and have a lot of support around making harm minimisation in that. And for many women, they actually are assisted to cut down and abstain during their pregnancy and afterwards. So I think the more that that we're aware of that in the community, we can then refer women with problematic drinking into our clinics in our tertiary women's hospitals, and they do amazing work.
Right. Now, Katerina, a few years ago, FAIR ran a program called the Pregnant Pause, where they were trying to engage with partners, including fathers, to support their partners to stop drinking during pregnancy. That relates to this question. What should we be doing? Should we be including fathers? I think the answer is yes. And perhaps you could tell us how you're going to target fathers in the awareness campaign.
Sure. I think it's really important to always point out when it comes to these different health issues or conversations that people don't exist in a vacuum. So they exist in a broader community and a broader environment, and one where alcohol is ever present and it seems like it's everywhere. So we've absolutely identified this with Every Moment Matters, and it was really important in the materials that we prepared that it shows not just the woman refusing alcohol, but the people around her providing that support as well. And the next phase of the campaign, we're really looking at the influencers, so the people around the woman, and seeing messages and ways that we can target and reach those people as well, because we can all play a role in providing that supportive community. And no one should, no one should have to go through these things alone. So it's definitely a key part of our next phase. And on our Every Moment Matters website, you can jump on and there's a section for people who might be the partner of a woman or a family member to find out how they can provide support as well. So it's an excellent question, and it's great that we're all thinking in that space.
Great, thanks. Now, the next question comes from a child health nurse, and she wants to talk about women's mental health. She said she feels that so many talks address the physical aspects of breastfeeding and highlights the importance of emotional and mental effects on mothers who initiate and continue to breastfeeding. She said she's encountered many women who cease breastfeeding because of drug and alcohol problems, also mums who become very agitated and anxious. She asked about a phone line support, and we've already heard about that from Naomi. You might like to elaborate on that, Naomi, that can provide ongoing counselling. So I'll start with you, Naomi, and then I'd like to get opinions from Nicole and Alyssa and others about these sort of the mental health aspects, the bonding aspects that are so important with breastfeeding. So Naomi, first of all, just the helpline again.
Yeah, so we have the National Breastfeeding Helpline, which is a government-funded helpline, 24 hours, 7 days a week, and it is staffed by trained volunteer breastfeeding counsellors. They can specifically help with talking through any issues around breastfeeding specifically. and some other mothering and parenting issues. Probably when it comes to anxiety or drug and alcohol problems, we would probably refer on to other services such as PANDA or COPE, the Centre of Perinatal Excellence. And there may be some others, but they're the first two that come to mind as the main ones that we would refer on to.
Great. Marnie, would you like to talk a bit about the sort of the mental health aspects as well as the physical aspects, the benefits of breastfeeding?
Sure. There's a number of questions in here. I've been scribbling away at myself. One of the issues that I'm frequently asked to talk about is grief and trauma around breastfeeding and when breastfeeding doesn't go well. And it's a very real issue, and it's something that we need to talk about. And I think sometimes women take the view that when they've needed to stop breastfeeding earlier than they'd planned for whatever reason, that it's an entirely something that's their fault, and they carry a lot of grief rather than viewing it as hold a lot of guilt rather than viewing it as a grief and a loss. And there are women who have to stop breastfeeding for very, very good reasons, and their use of alcohol or other medications that might not be safe to use in breastfeeding is one of those areas. And I think we need to be really aware of that. I think on the subject of mental health and the safety of medication in breastfeeding, I think this is a subject that's really close to my heart, because I work half my week in a consult liaison service in a tertiary women's hospital in mental health in the perinatal period. And I think it's really important that people are aware that each of our tertiary hospitals has a drug information service specifically about medication safety in pregnancy and breastfeeding. There are a lot of drugs that are in fact safe to use while you breastfeed, and it's really important that people get accurate information about that rather than assuming that they need to stop breastfeeding in order to be treated for their mental health problems. Has that answered the question?
It has. Thanks, Marnie. And Tina's also put onto the chat a number of other sources of information and support for people. I might just ask Alyssa and then Nicole, as mums who've breastfed, what benefits did you feel also stemmed for your mental health and well-being?
I think for me, the one big benefit of breastfeeding is just that it was always there and always ready. And every time I forgot to take snacks to swimming lessons, it was, like there was a lot that I didn't have to worry about and manage because I was breastfeeding in terms of sort of the extra work, I guess, that would be produced. And I found it was just a really great way to, particularly as the kids got older into those toddler years, to get sort of, that snuggles and closeness when they're sort of more inclined to sort of run away and explore and do things. It's a great opportunity, I guess, to reconnect when they come back. And you can do that without breastfeeding, but the breastfeeding was sort of a nice little way of making sure that happened in the day.
And you breastfed both your boys for quite a long time?
Yes, yeah, my first fed to 4.5 years and my 3-year-old is still feeding. So I found that really valuable for them and for me as well, as sort of a parenting strategy in the toddler years. Milk can solve all sorts of little toddler disasters. And, it was great for both of us in that relationship to have that sort of source of comfort, particularly when I was quite tired and overwhelmed. It's quite a low effort way to sort of rest and reconnect together. I don't have to think a bit, about sort of, whereas I think maybe if I'd had to be, when I was tired, because I was tired a lot, my kids were not good sleepers, it was an easy way for us to have a nice, comforting sort of reconnection and relationship together. I really loved it.
Thanks, Alyssa. Nick, did you want to make any comments about your I don't know if you're still breastfeeding, but your breastfeeding and how you're managing alcohol, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't drinking by the time I've had my second bub, but in addition to what has already been said, you know, like I had said before, I had a healthy, you know, breastfeeding experience. I didn't experience issues with milk production or anything like that. And it's really important that people do raise the mental health and the social emotional well-being that many people have triggered. They come from very complex trauma backgrounds. And I think, you know, sometimes it's really useful when we talk about these issues that we're talking to the general population with the assumptions that there is a healthy background there. And of course, we know that that's not the case for everyone. You know, many people struggle. And then that's layered when women aren't able to breastfeed, and the feelings associated with that. I mean, we already feel, you know, guilt as soon as we conceive, and then we feel like failures every moment that our kids are, you know, traveling forevermore, because no one's an expert at parenting, and there's no confidence that comes with parenting because our children remind us every day of how we are not meeting their needs in various, you know, tantrums. So I think, you know, to keep that salient in our minds, and it did come up in HMRC guidelines, and there has been a push to advocate for, in the next reiteration of the guidelines, for a guideline 4 around mental health, and for a suite of guidelines to be set around what's the best evidence say around alcohol and mental health, and what does this mean for breastfeeding? What does this mean for pregnancy? And having a really good, robust evidence base in which we can make recommendations and give health professionals and Australians that are having various struggles, because it's all a spectrum, how can they make, you know, informed decisions given their circumstances and their background?
Yeah, and I think, as Katarina pointed out before, I mean, alcohol can be used to self-medicate to deal with mental health problems, but in turn can also cause mental health problems. So look, we're nearing the end of time. There is one question about the role of alcohol in genetics, and I'll just briefly answer that by saying that there's a whole new science of epigenetics, which suggests that exposures both prior to pregnancy, during pregnancy, and postnatally may actually switch on certain genes, or other genes they may switch off, which might then determine your risk for later health problems. So it really is an emerging science, and there's more to come on that. And I suspect that sort of evidence may be influential in the future in informing our public health messages. So we're near the end of time, but I just want to ask, go around and see if anyone has any sort of final comments. Katarina, do you have a final comment you'd like to make?
I think the final comment is that, you know, health professionals play such a significant role in answering questions that people have around alcohol, around pregnancy, around mental health, around breastfeeding. And it's really important that messages are consistent, and that we're providing the support that people need. Messaging is really important. And so it's about making sure that we're meeting people where they're at, and giving them the right advice, and then providing supports and referrals when people need that additional support as well.
Thanks. Marnie?
Thanks, Liz. I think I've said all my things. I think the most important thing is that individualisation of our messages when we're talking to families. And I guess that we know that for some women, it's not going to be safe for them to continue breastfeeding with their level of alcohol use. It's my wish that that we're able to help women to understand where the evidence sits and what they can do if they do want to drink small amounts infrequently, so that we don't have a situation where women are stopping breastfeeding unnecessarily in order to have very infrequent drinks.
Thanks, Marnie. Ros?
Yeah, I think everyone's really covered the information, but my advice or suggestion would be never miss an opportunity to upskill someone in your sphere of influence. So when I started my PhD research journey, I became so aware of drinking at a first birthday party or a christening or in the park. And then it made me so aware that it's a whole community that really needs to change that ubiquitous alcohol intake. And I often feel like the pariah, and I'm not a teetotaler, I do like a drink, but there is a time and place for alcohol consumption. And is it actually at the first birthday party? Well, that's not my party, so no, it's not. And I really encourage others in my family and my friendship group to also consider those relationships with alcohol. And I find that's a very powerful way to help people in that environment, and those, as Naomi talked about, those real structural changes and environmental changes and social changes that also need to take place. So yeah, don't miss that opportunity. And sometimes when we drink alcohol, I think Liz, you might have said this, or maybe Professor Carol Bauer, when you drink alcohol, you view the world through rose-colored glasses. So you don't quite see all that alcohol consumption around you, or you normalize it. And it's really important that it's not normal. And as a dietitian, I often start a presentation saying that alcohol is a toxin. It's a toxin in our body. It's a non-nutrient, and it stops every other metabolic process of digestion to ensure that alcohol is metabolized first and removed as fast as possible.
Thanks, Ros. Naomi.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it really is a whole of society issue. But really, the other thing is that becoming a new mother or a new parent is overwhelming. There is so much information to take on board and to distill and to understand how it relates to you as an individual and to your child. And I guess really that's where, when it comes to breastfeeding, ABA is here to support mothers and their families to reach their own breastfeeding goals and to help them feel as informed as possible to be able to make those decisions. So yeah, just the National Breastfeeding Helpline. So thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. And very briefly, Alyssa.
Just my main thing, I guess, for healthcare providers is I really value when my health providers see me as a person who has the ability to understand the information and make an informed choice. And so I guess that's the one thing I'd love people to take away, is to see the person you're working with as a whole person who has knowledge and can apply it. And I really valued understanding how alcohol works with breastfeeding, and that helped me to make the choices.
Thank you. And Nicole.
I suppose, I think that every person in this country should have equitable access to knowledge, support, advice and services with regards to anything, and especially to alcohol, when there is so much confusion out there. And I think we all have a duty to ensure that everyone has that access to clear, consistent messaging.
Thanks so much. Look, I really want to thank you all. I think it's been a really interesting session, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope that all the other health professionals, researchers and others on the so thank you all. If anyone needs more information, we do have information available, the NHMRC guidelines, the Australian Breastfeeding Association, FARES website and the Feed Safe app. These are just some useful websites. We do encourage you to come to the FASD Hub and do let us know what other information you'd like there and what we could do better.